Apologies for the length, I'll be sure to include a TLDR at the end. All names have been changed to protect the innocent. This is actually a story my dad told me about one of his childhood friends, George, who recently passed away. Dad and George grew up in a booming city in what's now known as the Rust Belt. You were pretty much guaranteed a job at the major car plant in town. You were pretty much guaranteed a job at the plant in town as soon as you got out of high school. George was one of those people. Dad wasn't. Dad accepted a scholarship to his dream school to study engineering. During the weekends and holidays, he'd come home and hang out with his buddies, including George. One afternoon, Dad gets a phone call from Grandma. George had been jumped after work and had the metaphorical tar beaten out of him for a while. It looked like he wasn't going to make it, by some miracle. George pulled through but was in such bad shape that he had to retire early and go on disability. While on one of his visits home, George's dad, Walter, pulls Dad aside and asks him if he knows a guy named Flynn. Dad had heard the name was one of the local troublemakers. He asked Walter why, and Walter revealed that the wallet had been found by George's body and given to him. The paramedics thought the wallet was George's. I have no idea why they didn't check on it, unfortunately. The city was going through financial difficulties thanks to corruption and mismanagement, to the point that they didn't have enough money to pay their police officers during the weekends. No, I am not kidding. From 8 p.m. Friday night to 6 a.m. Monday morning, there wasn't a single police officer on duty since the assault took place on Friday night. There wasn't much anyone can do. Dad asked Walter what he was going to do about it. Walter looked at him with a stern face and said, "I take care of my own." Walter was an Army vet who had served during WWII and Korea. He never spoke about his time, claiming he was a radio technician and never left the base. He never breathed a word to anyone, even George's mother, his wife. The full story never came out until after George's death, when a letter Walter had written before his death was found in George's possessions. After realizing that Flynn was one of the people who had destroyed George's life, Walter got in touch with his friends. He was a personable guy, you know, the type, the kind who makes friends in 5 minutes. They all agreed that something had to be done, and thus Operation George's Revenge was born. Walter and his friends began observations of Flynn and would keep tabs on him. It took several weeks, but eventually, Flynn and his buddies Mac and Zeno were overheard bragging about the attack. Knowing who to attack, they moved to the next steps. Walter's friends, some of whom worked in high places, decided to make some phone calls to their friends in the plant where all three worked. See, these friends were union. State was closed shop at the time and disgusted about what happened to George. They decided to make things difficult for them. They'd remove vital tools for emergency maintenance at the last minute, put them in positions they weren't good in, and rearranged the schedule so they got the worst shifts, to name a few. They also began a whispering campaign so everyone at the plant knew what had happened. In this city back then, who you knew and what everyone thought you've done was enough to make or break you. The goal was to get them to quit, and after a year or so, all three had quit. Frustrated with how they were being treated, but Walter and his friends aren't done. Not by a long shot. A few phone calls and anonymous letters later, Flynn, Mac and Zeno were unemployable in the district because they hadn't been fired. They weren't entitled to severance or anything. Soon their money ran out, but they couldn't get out of town because everyone knew from the whispering campaign what they had done to George. For the rest of their lives, Walter and his friends kept an eye on Flynn, Mac and Zeno. Just when it appeared that they had an out, the whisper letter campaign would start again and they'd be denied an out. The three men ended up homeless and destitute, alcoholics who couldn't even get state aid. And this is in a state that is known for its generous aid for those in bad straits. Walter and his friends made a contingency plan to continue this until the three men were dead, using the next generation so those men would never forget what they did to George. Nobody was able to find out anything about Flynn, Mac, and Zeno, but I wouldn't be surprised that they're still stuck and miserable. TLDR. Dad's childhood buddy was jumped by 3 troublemakers. Childhood buddy's veteran father and his friends decide to make troublemakers' lives heck for the rest of their lives. Initially posted this in our ProRevenge, was told it would also be good story to tell in this sub. This is a long one. Skip to the bottom for the TL, doctor if you must. Edit. Forgot a few words and sentences on the initial post many years ago. I worked at an automotive repair shop that was owned by a very nasty person. This person actually had 2 shops that he ran, and the best way I can describe him was as a tyrant. Both shops had cameras, and he would watch us work from the comfort of his home. If he saw something he didn't like, such as taking a 5-minute smoke break, or not sweeping for half a minute during downtime, or if he just wanted to bust balls, he would call the shop and harass us. Or better yet, at times show up and harass us in person. In addition, he would regularly berate us for no reason, threaten to not pay us because the shops weren't busy, and would have an absolute meltdown if you dared question his authority. It was spectacular. In the worst of ways, after working for him for a few months, and dealing with his shenanigans and getting sick of pointless arguments with him, I started reconsidering my employment there. Around the same time, the owner decided to move me from one shop to the other, really for no reason other than likely to try push me out, as that was what he did with the few people that I had already worked with. A coincidence being that I had not discussed my thoughts of leaving with anyone, but I digress. I genuinely disliked the idea of working at this other shop. It was older and a bit run down. Plus, it was in a pretty terrible area with high crime, but I wanted to line something up elsewhere before I jumped ship, so I made the move. This is where the beginning of the end started for owner. Once I got settled into the new shop, I got to talking with my fellow technicians. As it turns out, the owner was unsurprisingly a racist scumbag, and every single one of the employees at this location, aside from me, was African American. I'll spare you the details, but let's just say it's a miracle that the owner came into the shop, said what he said, and walked out breathing. In addition, he would regularly send people home with no pay for the day just to be an ass. This went on for a few weeks. Him coming by, being nasty to all of us, and I was over it, and was just about to leave as I had lined up other employment. The other techs were also over it. I went to give the owner my 2-week notice via phone, discreetly, which I should have known wasn't a great idea. And instead of discussing it like a human, he decided to come down and talk face to face. Well, our friend was so incensed that I put my notice in that he forced me to clock out and go home, and also forced to other techs who decided to stand up for me to do the same. I decided that I had enough of this guy's shit, and that not only did he deserve to have some kind of reciprocation against him, but the other techs deserved better than to continually being walked on. So I filed a complaint with the Department of Labor, and outlined everything. Within a few days they had launched an investigation, and of course the owner found out who filed the complaint and called the shop, and gave me hell about it, stupidly, because the phones he had were on recorded lines. Guess who I had request to listen to that conversation in the end? I was terminated by him prior to my 2 weeks being up, as were the 2 techs who stood behind me. I filed for unemployment, which he fought me on by filing appeals with a judge, then not showing up 3 times in a row. This prompted the judge to bar him from requesting appeals against me, and granting me full unemployment pay. Months later, I got a written letter from him extending an apology and offer to work for him again. 2 months later, I got a letter from the DOL saying that the investigation was closed, and that he had been found guilty of multiple charges and was barred from operating a shop or any other business in the state for several years. TL, doctor fucked around with my sanity, lost the ability to own shit.